Hello and welcome to Open Minds UFO Radio. This is your host, Alejandro Rojas. We have with us Martin Goofball Willis, my usual UFO news guest. And then, of course, we've got, since this is our special 2018 year in review, we have our good old buddy, Dr. Lee Pizza Boy Speigel.
I wondered if you were going to give me another name like Goofball, but Pizza Boy, yeah. That's good. It's good. Yeah.
I'm jealous, Lee, actually.
Just because they're both goofballs, and it was hard to wrangle them so we could start the show. And of course, Lee and I have this running joke about being doctors and ordering pizzas from each other. And the listeners might remember, like, I think it was a UK tabloid that referred to me as Dr. Rojas, and that's why I had and then somebody referenced you as a doctor too, right, Lee?
I don't know. If they had, they didn't do it to my face.
I think it was even Coast to Coast or something, and that's why we started that.
I haven't even been. And you know, that's kind of an ongoing joke that I have with Stan Friedman. Every single time I call Stan just to have a conversation and say hello, and he picks up the phone, I go, Dr. Friedman, and he says, no, I'm not a doctor. Don't I have to keep telling you that?
A lot of people have made that mistake.
Yeah, he's very good at pointing that out. He's not a doctor.
Yeah.
Which is important because, unfortunately, some people in this field have not been quick to point that out, and they've led people to believe the wrong thing.
Sure. Yeah, and he likes to keep everything factual, so I understand why he wants to stay very, very credible and okay. But to me, he's a doctor, so what do you want?
Yeah. Honorary doctorate from Lee Speigel University.
That's right.
So before we get into our year in review, let's talk some UFO news, and you've got something for us, right, Mr. Willis?
Yes, well, it's kind of this is space news more than UFO news, but interesting anyway. So China's Chang'e 4 spacecraft made the first ever soft landing on the far side of the moon in a mission investigating the history of the solar system and paving the way for future exploration. By the way, some people call it the dark side of the moon, but it is indeed not. It just depends on its relation to orbiting the Earth and facing the sun and all that. It does get sunlight, and a lot of people are unaware of that just because the moon is fixated, and because of the gravity and the more metals or whatever on one side of it. So we only see one part of it. Anyway, this is exploring the other part, and landed in this huge crater. It's actually part of a larger crater. I know the one it landed in is 186 kilometers wide. I'm not sure. I think it's something like 2,500 kilometers wide. The whole, the major crater. It's the largest one actually known in the solar system. So they're actually hoping that they can, and it's called the von Karman crater, and they're hoping that they can actually find something where this impact is that may actually lead to the development of the moon itself. It's really interesting, and that's something that just landed. It took off, I think, in December 8th or something like that, and orbited for all that time.
And it just landed today. So, and I think they're even going to try to grow some seeds or something like that on the moon, but they don't share as much information. That's why, in fact, on this side, we didn't even know exactly when it was going to land. But it's funny because when I say dark side of the moon, which many of the stories do, because it's kind of just a phrase that we use, even though, like you pointed out, it's not technically dark, it does get light, which just is more accurately the far side of the moon, the side that we don't see. You got another one?
Well, I just this fascinating image that just came forward of the the number of it is 2014 MU69, aka Ultima Thule, and it was taken by NASA's New Horizons spacecraft on its approach. Now, this was 4 billion miles away and from Earth, actually, and the New Horizon was about 50,000 kilometers away from the object when it took this picture, but it looks like a snowman. And I don't know if everyone's looked into this, but it really is quite an amazing, it's a binary shape. It was probably two objects that kind of slowly came together because there's no evidence of any type of collision with the two objects. And so they're just kind of formed together at one time. And this may have happened, billions of years ago. They're not really sure. It's about 14 kilometers across, 19 kilometers wide.
How far away is it again?
I believe it's about 4 billion miles from the Earth. So it's actually the furthest object that we've actually been able to see. Pretty amazing.
That is amazing. Do you know for sure you have the pronunciations right of the Chinese lander and the name of?
Well, the Chang'e, yes, I did. I was very careful because that is the Chinese goddess. So I went, check that out to make sure that was pronounced correctly. As far as this Thule, I guess the bike rack company bunker of pronouncing some of these things.
The bike rack company of the same name goes by Thule. So
that's what I meant to say.
And I don't know. I'm just curious if you looked into it so I can know how to say these things. And how do you say the lander again?
That's Chang'e. Chang'e 4. Yeah.
Chang'e 4. Ooh, cool. Because I didn't know that one, and I know, destroying it when I've mentioned it in the past. I'm sure I made some really stupid sounding noises.
Well, they had the Chang'e 3. So, it's and then they're actually going to be launching one more in 2019 coming up. Another one fairly soon, actually in March, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll wrap up the news, but I think that it's an important thing. These stories are important that you bring up because that's one thing about 2018 is for space exploration. It's been extraordinary. There's been so many changes. We're really close to actual civilian space travel. And, of course, I did a story on Den of Geek on that. We've talked about it in the past. And, I've got to get a YouTube video up on that. But with the Chinese and everybody ramping up going to the moon, it's been really an extraordinary year for space. And what do you think, Lee? Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think you're right. And by luck, I was in California a couple of months ago working on this documentary, as you know, and I was there on the night that SpaceX launched a satellite from Vandenberg Air Force Base, and people came into the studio where I was working, and they said, "You got to come outside. There's a UFO right in the sky above us." And I went outside with my camera, and this amazing sight in the sky, it almost looked like a big comet with a trail coming back from it, and I didn't know what it was, and I had forgotten the news items that SpaceX had launched this new satellite. And I said, well, whatever it is, for the moment it's a UFO, but I'll bet it'll be on the news tonight. And of course it was, and I took some pictures of it, and they said on the news, and I went to the SpaceX site later and saw the actual replay of the launch, and at the exact moment where my camera recorded this thing in the sky, that's when the first stage of the rocket was falling back to Earth before it was going to come back for that perfect landing. that they had on the news later that night. So yeah, it is amazing that there's all this entrepreneurial stuff going on as far as the space race. It's not just the Americans versus the Soviet Union like it was in the 60s. This is a whole different ballgame now of what the space race is all about.
So, Lee, people might not realize you've been kind of on a secret project lately, working with James Fox, who has created, I believe, some of the best UFO documentaries out there on this latest documentary. So that's pretty exciting. Is that getting pretty close to finished?
Yeah, we're getting closer and closer. James has actually been working on this for 4 or 5 years. I've been on the project for the last year and a half. And for me, it's been a long year and a half. I can't believe that it was like June of 2017 when my career at the Huffington Post came to an end so that I could really start working on this project with James. And now here we are, like a year and a half later, and where did the time go?
Time flies.
We have gathered some incredible interview footage from people that will take the breath away, we hope, of the audience when they finally get a chance to see this, where we've got a few more segments that still need to be produced, and we're looking at literally an early spring readiness for the public. And I know there are a lot of stuff that's coming up on TV about UFOs that are about to hit as well, so the timing is pretty good for us in the project.
Pretty exciting, and I almost forgot about this. I've got a TV project that's going to air on the 10th on the CW, something I helped produce also, and I'm in a bit of it. Ryan Sprague is one of the hosts, but that is in relation to the Roswell program, and they just announced that today, that they're going to be airing it on the 10th, and then it'll be online, and I'll be able to show people. So I almost forgot about that.
Yeah, wow. They've been doing a lot of promos for that show on TV, I've noticed. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So 2018 was not only an important year for space in general, the space industry and space exploration, but I feel it was probably the most important year ever, and we'll get into why in this show, for UFOs as well. It's been an extraordinary year. So what we'll do is we'll kind of go one at a time, what we think is a great, and let's start off with what we think is the biggest story, and then we'll keep going, because it's hard for me to even determine which one I think is the biggest out of the group that I have here. But we'll keep going around, and so we'll let Lee go first, since you are the guest. And to be honest, out of mine, all of them are news related to the Pentagon program, except for one. So,
it's funny because for me, the year started out and then continued with what was, of course, the biggest UFO story of 2017. The whole revelation by the New York Times that the Pentagon had been secretly studying UFOs for several years. And that story lingered throughout 2018. And many of us are still waiting for more film evidence to be released by the government. So it hasn't gone away like so many other stories have. This thing is right there, still right up there near the top for me.
Mm-hmm. So Absolutely. That's your number one story?
Well, no, it's not the number one story. It's although the number one story maybe for me. It's funny because I started on my list and I just numbered this as number one, but then when I got all the way down to the end, I came up with, of course, this other fascinating offshoot of that 2017 New York Times piece about the Pentagon UFO studies. What's still floating around is the idea that there's a lot of competition out there now among the UFO researchers and scientists over the analysis of alleged fragments or pieces from UFOs. This is a very big story, and even I recently had a unique opportunity to see and to hold some reportedly real UFO material that's being analyzed now by scientists, and they're not yet ready to go public with their amazing findings, but they will. And I can say that with really total certainty because I was there in their laboratory. And on that particular note, I'll kind of leave it at more to come, but it's going to be amazing when they do release their information, their findings, and they're going to release it to everybody. They're not going to hold back. They're not going to ask for money. They're going to release it to science and say, here's what we've come up with. We can conclude very definitely that some of these fragments were not naturally formed and that they were manufactured by someone. And we sure would like to know who did the manufacturing and for what purpose. So that's going to be amazing when that finally happens.
Now, is this analysis related at all or being looked at by To the Stars Academy? So Tom DeLonge's group and the group that says they're doing all this analysis?
No. These are separate individuals who have nothing to do with Tom DeLonge or the To the Stars. And basically, I'm a witness to the fact that they can see, without giving it away too much, they will be able to conclude that some of these fragments are not from Earth. Because
this has nothing to do with Bigelow?
No, nothing to do. No, not even with Robert Bigelow.
So that's pretty cool. So and I want to summarize just so people know what we're talking about. So of course, there's To the Stars Academy, which was started essentially by Tom DeLonge, which includes a lot of these retired defense intelligence people, including Luis Elizondo, who ran this program that was revealed in this New York Times article in December. And in that article, Luis said that they had some sort of material that was stored by Robert Bigelow, who runs Bigelow Aerospace, and that this was anomalous material that they were going to look into. And then as time went on, some of the stories related to this that we came out with this year is that that they were forming a partnership with Earth Tech, this other company, where they're going to be looking at and analyzing materials that may be anomalous. There was even hints that maybe they had found something anomalous. Of course, we had Chris Cogswell on the show, and he's got a bit of frustration because he feels that, you know, to make a statement like that is really bold, and there are a number of steps you have to complete. In his eyes, you have to prove that it's manufactured, that the manufacturing process is technology that we could not have done, that it's beyond our capability, and of course that the material is not from this planet. So he feels that's too high of a bar that anybody could meet, and we've kind of have Elizondo more recently walking back his comments a little bit, saying that they don't know that they found anything yet, and that they're being careful to not put, just like he said, the cart before the horse, that they're doing their due diligence to make sure they have some solid evidence before they come out with it. So that's extraordinary to hear that, first of all, you know, To the Stars is doing this work and potentially might have something, and now you have another lead on another source.
Well, you know, I've always, historically for myself, I've always been dubious about claims that people had fragments or pieces of UFOs that either had crashed or exploded. But in fact, these kinds of things did happen. One famous case that comes to mind is, I believe it was 1957, over Ubatuba, Brazil, a seaside community. Something came streaking out of the sky and it exploded, and it showered the water, the community, the land. I mean, pieces of it were all over the place. So before even the authorities could get there, people were snatching stuff up. You know, so it's not impossible that pieces are legitimately from something that's unexplainable. And this is just one case that comes to mind. And I held and I looked at pieces from this Ubatuba case. But that's not even the bigger part of the story. It's okay, fine. You've got fragments of something that you don't know what the something was. How do you analyze it so that science really doesn't know what to make of this? Well, you have to come up with new technologies that can analyze this stuff, and that's exactly what these scientists that I am now aware of have done. They have come up with brand new technology. I've been there. I've seen it. I have photographed it. It's incredible what they can do now. It took my breath away.
So, Lee, can you give us any more details on this? Or this didn't actually come from the Brazil crash, did it? Or can you tell us where it came from?
Some of the pieces. I mean, what they brought on this particular day to the laboratory was a huge collection of pieces that supposedly came from UFOs from around the world, going back to the 1940s. A lot of stuff. I was holding this stuff in my hands in special containers, and that was just. I kept saying to my co-producer James, I kept saying, "Please pinch me. I can't believe we're witnessing this. This is just amazing." And these people who are doing this research are being very private now, and we're not letting the information out at this point as to who they are, because at any point they could just decide to say, no, we're done. We're not going any further with this because we don't trust anybody. So I'm okay with that. And I don't mean to tease you or to tease the audience, but at this point, the tease is all that I can offer, because it will come out, and nothing will be hidden, because they want this information to come out, and they want to share it with science, and they want to give it to everybody who is a believer or total skeptic or debunker. They want people to say, here, take this information that we've just created, now come up with your own analysis based on it, and let us know what you know.
Is there going to be more information about this material in the documentary?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yes, we've actually already filmed that segment. Yes.
So that's some big news right there. That's the biggest news of 2019 when it comes to UFOs now.
Well, I'm hoping that it will be, because I think that anything to do with fragments, this harkens back to the story of Bob Lazar, and who claims that he actually worked on and went inside a flying saucer at Area 51. This is kind of on that level, I think, because now we're talking about fragments that can be analyzed to prove they weren't manufactured here. That's a big story, I think.
That is a big story. That's a really big deal.
And I'm not saying to you or to the audience or anybody else, any scientists out there listening in, I'm not saying take my word for it. Don't believe anything I say. I'm just saying be patient. Be patient, because I believe eventually, if it wasn't these people that I've witnessed this from, if it wasn't them, it would be someone else who I believe will eventually come out with this kind of proof.
Well, I hope so. The bar is so high that I'm still very skeptical. I hope so, and I know. But I do want to say to the audience who may not be as familiar with your work, Lee wrote for the Huffington Post for many years, and AOL and many news organizations, and there's many conversations that we've had where credibility is really important, and that people did not meet that high bar that you even needed as a journalist. So just how significant it is for you to be saying this right now, to me, is very important. It means that it's a higher level of credibility. It's more than we've heard really from To the Stars. So that's really interesting.
Well, I appreciate that, and like I say, the experience that I had going to this place, and I won't even say where it was quite obvious that there's a lot of money behind this research.
Wow.
Totally funded. Yeah. Just to look at the equipment that they're using to do the analysis is just mind-blowing. That's all I can say.
Well, we're out of time for this first segment, so we're going to have to go to break, and then we'll change the subject here to get back onto the topic for 2018. But no doubt we will be revisiting this, and Mr. Lee Spiegel's claims most likely we'll need to wait till the documentary comes out, so hopefully that won't be too long.
Right.
But we've got to go to break now, and then we'll be back to talk more about some of the top stories of 2018. For those of you listening to the podcast, you'll just hear a short musical interlude. For the rest of you, you'll hear a commercial. But we'll be right back with Lee Speigel and Martin Willis talking year in review for 2018. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Minds UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I know we were just talking about an extremely interesting topic, but we got to move on because I think we have a lot of really interesting stuff to talk about. So we're talking about the year in review in 2018, and now it is your turn, Mr. Willis, to tell us what is your top story for the year.
Well, I actually agree with what Lee just said about, I think, the interesting story of 2018 is that UFOs have been taken more seriously. The year shows basically the after effects of, the December 16th, 2017 New York Times article, in the news media, for the most part, because, there's no ridicule. It seems to kind of have vanished like I said, for the most part. You really don't hear, the X-Files intro music as often as you used to whenever they're talking about UFOs. And that article actually, again, as Lee said, it spawned over 130 news shows in particular that started in December, and they kept trickling on into 2018. And also starting basically at the end of December and into January of this year, the former U.S. Navy pilot David Fravor came forward, and he did several interviews. And I think that's a big deal because, he is a retired U.S. Navy pilot, and he was actually talking about this publicly. And, he claims that he was at the controls of an F/A-18F fighter, and flying off of San Diego. This was back in 2004. And then he intercepted an object that looked like the 40-foot-long Tic Tac candy. He talked about that it accelerated rapidly and disappeared, and a whole bunch of other details. And again, this is a former U.S. Navy pilot talking about this freely on the news, many interviews. Also, of course, Luis Elizondo, who ran ATIP, and from 2007 to 2012, he spoke out a lot about this last year. I went to a MUFON convention when he was there. I got to meet him and talk to him. He's a great guy. And I think one of the key things that he said and was most notable is, and I'm quoting here, "My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone," unquote. And that was from a CNN interview, and that just kind of circulated a lot. I mean, that was, again, a big deal. And more recently, in a George Knapp interview, he said there is much more to come in 2019. So I'm pretty excited about that. I also wanted to say that a seasoned reporter, Hedley Burrell, I don't know if you remember him, or Lee, you may know who that is.
No, I don't.
I think he was in the Washington Post for years, many years ago. And he wrote a very interesting article in the Herald Tribune on June 10th of this year. And the title of that was, "In this time of tension and anxiety, UFOs are back in the news." And he goes on to say, "Long ago, as a young reporter, I was well aware of UFOs. Out of curiosity, I read mainstream media pieces as well as tabloid tales. What repeatedly struck me was, as much as else in life, we were reluctant to simply accept that we didn't immediately know the answer to the mystery of the moment. In any event, I would not have imagined that some 6 decades later, UFO stories would still be around with heavily credentialed experts weighing in." And he goes on to say that the new spin on it is that it's serious this time, and no matter where it goes. It's definitely a serious subject at this time, all due to people with high credentials taking the subject seriously. That's the difference between then and now.
Yeah, there was a story in the Washington Post. The headline was, UFOs are now a serious topic because of a rock star, Tom DeLonge. And that was a great article.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what was important was that headline that UFOs are taken seriously now. So I want to get to my first one, because the reason why I think we can't talk about ATIP just too broadly is because we'll lose all of the significant events that happened inside of the year related to this. So Lee brought up one, this material. Then he dropped a bomb on us that he has looked at some material and has heard from some scientists that they think it's anomalous. You've brought the great point that overall this has all made the topic more serious. But one piece of news, I guess, that I would put on top of all of these this year came in May. And most of these are George Knapp stories. George Knapp is breaking all the latest, greatest news. And that was his story that was called Documents Prove Secret Study Based in Nevada. And I kind of blame him, and I should joke around with him and talk to him about this, that he kind of buried the lead, because the leads were not that these documents came out. The big stories were twofold. Was that ATIP was not the organization. The group that Luis Elizondo worked with was not the organization that got that $20 million. Right. That instead it was a different organization called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program, which the acronym is AAWSAP, so we've been calling it OSAP. They're the ones who got the money. And not only that, when they got the money, it was in order to investigate Skinwalker Ranch.
Right.
On top of that, and this is what's crazy about it, is that a senior manager of Bigelow Aerospace, and Bigelow, for people who may know, in the 90s is when Bigelow started investigating the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, which lots of paranormal activity was supposedly happening at. It kind of stopped around 2000, and so eventually they let George Knapp and Colm Kelleher, the lead scientist, write this book in 2005. That inspired some people to come forward, or at least an individual from the DIA, to come look at Skinwalker Ranch. This person had their own paranormal experience, went back to Washington and spoke to Harry Reid and said, hey, I know you know about this stuff. We need to study this stuff. The government needs to study this paranormal activity. And that's what it was, not just UFOs, but paranormal activity. And so that's what got the funding. And in fact, this Bigelow senior manager said that they were studying more than UFOs, but, quote, a whole panoply of diverse activity that included bizarre creatures, poltergeist activity, invisible entities, orbs of lights, animal and human injuries, and much more. It went on to say that whatever this is deceptive and is fooling humanity and jacking with us. And I mean, holy crap, it wasn't UFOs they spent that $22 million on. It was a whole gamut of paranormal research.
Amazing.
Isn't that wild? I don't think that the public has completely digested that. Then luckily, soon after that, Jeremy Corbell came out with his documentary on Skinwalker Ranch that brought some more visibility to it, with some great reporting and footage from George Knapp, who I'm just, I think we're all a huge fan of. To me, I think that was probably the news that has been hardest to digest, that hasn't been fully digested yet, and probably the biggest OMG, WTF moment out of all of this.
Yes, I agree. And the reason I agree with you about this is because, without giving more of the details away yet, because I'm still involved with the documentary, but several months ago, you mentioned Harry Reid, who was once the most powerful man in the Senate as the Senate Majority Leader. in a private meeting with Harry Reid, James Fox and I learned from Harry Reid more about Skinwalker Ranch than has come out yet, and that his passion for wanting science to study this, and in fact, not only is he interested in the Skinwalker Ranch and all the paranormal goings on there, but he even hinted that Skinwalker Ranch is only one of many places like that around the world. And he thinks that this stuff has to be studied scientifically. People can't just keep burying their heads in the sand over this stuff. Again, this was one of those encounters that I had last year in which I kept saying to James, pinch me. I can't believe we're talking to Harry Reid about this stuff. It's like, are you kidding?
Well, that's it. That reminds me of another part of this story, because this story was so rich and it was so much more than the headline kind of led, which was that a major faction, and Luis Elizondo came out and wrote about this more afterwards, and George Knapp even referred to Nick Redfern, who I interviewed on this a bit more, but a major faction that opposed and was very influential on closing down this whole investigation was this religious faction within the government who feels that it's related to Satan, and so we can't look into it. And Elizondo says even these people they're people I respect. They just have a different point of view, and we have to respect their point of view. He just said, I just disagree with it. And so when it did close down, that's when ATIP started. That's when Luis Elizondo's kind of program took over. But that's why he said he really kept under the radar, because he didn't want to grab the attention of this faction.
Yeah, I agree. There are all other factions out there too, not just religious. There's so much of this power that's divided up around the world. Like, who's really in control of all this stuff that we're talking about? And who's really in control of the information that really does or does not come out to the public? Who makes these decisions for what we're told and what we're not told? That's a big question that I always have.
Right. And are they compartmentalized, or what is it? And Alejandro, one thing on this, I can understand UFOs, the study and looking into UFOs, because of the aviation safety and security in general. But why the other paranormal?
Well,
why would
because
they look?
Here's why. And Nick Redfern actually was very insightful in this, in that they want to, with the other paranormal, understand the science. If you can understand the science, for instance, if there are portals that these creatures can create and go through, how do they do that? And if the military can do that, would we be able to just, instead of having to fly, a top secret helicopter into Bin Laden's encampment, could we have just opened up a portal and walked through that and then grabbed him and left? So trying to understand those technologies, which was extraordinary. And what Nick Redfern said is some of these guys on the inside, they thought the technology was related to Satan, but they wanted to learn how Satan could do these things so we could do them. So weird, so bizarre.
There's so much going on around us that we just don't know. And some of us, the three of us, are in a position to a degree to have contacts out there who can give us little pieces of the puzzle, so that we can then share it with the public through the things that we do. And I'm very honored to be part of that at least I feel like someone will tell us something, or you, Alejandro, or you, Martin, on your shows, that we want this information to get out little by little, piece by piece. I'm glad we can help in some way to do that.
Yep. So more stories. So these stories we're talking about in 2018 did that, certainly. So Lee, it's your turn. What's your second story?
I found a really interesting story. I don't know if either of you have heard this. This was from July 26th. 2018, a Washington, D.C. news radio station called WTOP. They printed a report that included a video that spotlighted a man who's a retired Air Force, Colonel David Shea. Have either of you heard about this guy? You know about David Shea?
He's like 90 years old or something. Yeah,
he's like 80 or so. Yes, from 1967 to 1971, he was the Air Force UFO spokesperson at the Pentagon. In fact, he was the man who wrote the 1969 news release that announced the end of Project Blue Book.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. Which for the audience, for all intents and purposes, his news release basically said the United States government washed its hands completely of all things related to UFOs. But we now know, going back to the 2017 New York Times piece, their hands weren't completely washed on this subject. And in this WTOP report, Colonel Shea said, and this is a quote, he said, "The UFOs never seem to go away." I love that sentence. Now, his whole master's degree thesis was about how the Air Force handled UFO reports. And this is what he wrote in his thesis. He said, "The story of the UFOs and the Air Force is essentially, it's a tale of a credibility gap that's wider than the Grand Canyon. During its more than 20-year history of investigating flying saucers, the Air Force has been accused of almost every conceivable sin and had been guilty of most." End quote.
What was this guy's name?
His name is Colonel David Shea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wrote that 69 news release ending Project Blue Book. Pretty interesting stuff. And you can go online, you can see the interview with him talking about his beliefs. He doesn't believe that there ever was enough evidence to really substantiate possible visitations from other planets. But he said it's the way the data is presented, and it hasn't been presented carefully enough by anybody. Even our mutual friend John Alexander has always said people are not asking the right questions about UFOs in order to get answers. Mm-hmm. It's all in the way it's reported.
Wow. So I'll put links to these stories on Open Minds and for YouTube in the show notes, because this was one I don't think I heard of. I think I missed this one. So this is extraordinary.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see him from just this past July talking on camera very openly and freely. In fact, one of the things he holds in the interview is it says on the front, Project Blue Book. And it's a gigantic book. He's thumbing through the pages of Project Blue Book and just talking about it. It's really, really fascinating to just look at this guy, because I had never heard of him before. And he obviously, my hat's off to the people at WTOP who found him and got him to talk. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, cool. What a great story. That's a really good one. So we'll put that in there. All right, good find, Mr. Speigel. All right, your turn.
Well, that was great. Yeah, that was really great. So I think it was a big year in aviation and aviation in UFOs. So I'd like to talk a bit about that in 2018. And one that seemed to happen, that happened on November 9th, 2018. And Ireland seemed to make the most news.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's important to note that the details are similar in some respects to the sightings over Oregon, which that actually happened in late 2017. But F-15 fighters were scrambled in that incident. One also happened in Arizona with Learjet and an Airbus on February 24th, 2018. And one in New York also on May 26th of this year, and that was with a Piper Saratoga. And so this is actually, going to the war zone. I know you've interviewed Tyler Rogaway. He does these stories also with Joseph Trevithick. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his last name. Well, the Irish incident happened in the pre-dawn hours of November 9th of this year. And it was about 45 minutes before sunrise, and at least 3 different airliners flying over the coast of southwestern Ireland reported seeing multiple unidentified objects flying near them at incredible speeds. Following the reports from a small number of aircraft on Friday on November 9th of unusual air activity the IAA, which is the Irish Aviation Authority, has filed a report. They said this report will be investigated under the normal and confidential investigation process. And there was also publicly available audio of the conversation between the passengers of the planes, the passenger planes, and Shannon Flight Information Region air traffic controllers. They offer more detail of what happened. And so basically, it goes back and forth. There's nothing showing on either primary or secondary radar. And then one pilot, I think he comes on and says, well, I'm glad I'm not the only one that saw this, or I'm paraphrasing here. Glad it wasn't just me. He chimed in. And so there was a third individual. It's unclear that I think they were on board a Speedbird 94 or something like that. And they considered it could be astronomical, and it looked like it was speeding at something like Mach 2, 2 times the speed of sound, something like that. And so when they reached out to authorities for a comment and more information regarding this incident, they received the following reply, quote, "The Defense Forces do not disclose their operational procedures for operational security reasons. This incident is a matter for the Irish Aviation Authority." And that's as far as it went, as far as I know at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Can
I add one little thing to that? What I especially liked about this story is anybody can go online and you can actually listen to the conversation between the pilots and the control center.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great.
Yeah, there were several stories like that Tyler Rogaway and the group over at the War Zone on the Drive had written about, and I did interview him in April, and he said he felt more empowered to write about this topic because of the Pentagon story in the New York Times from December. And he went on to say that he said everybody in aviation is interested in UFOs, and he said if there's anybody who tells you they're not, they're lying. That's what he went so far as to say that.
Wow.
Yeah. So there were several stories he wrote about at the time. I know one of his favorites, and I think it is the best case that he wrote about, is this one over California and Oregon, where he was just astonished the amount of material he was able to get from the government, from the FAA, and from these flight towers. But this one was caught on radar, traveling these incredible speeds. Several pilots had seen it. This object at over the airport in Oregon. So that's another great case. Yeah, we'll link to those. But I agree with you. That was one of my other notes, are these stories, these aviation stories. And it seems like, and I'd like to hear what you guys think, it's not that these stories, all of a sudden these aircraft are having interactions with UFOs. I think it's more of a case that all of a sudden serious journalists who have at least more access than the rest of us, like Rockaway, who has this experience working in the defense world, are able to get this information that we've never been able to get before. Like you said, Lee, like these audio files of these pilots in the middle of these encounters.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
And what
We've only got a minute.
Okay. Then let's do it after the break, because I want to tell about this story that Martin already started to talk about, but it's a bigger story, I think, than we even know about.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah.
Just for the last second here, someone had sent me a supposed video from the cockpit that had taken video, but I just couldn't confirm it.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any video out there, but certainly any listeners who are aware of some video, even if you're not sure if it's real or not, send it our way and we'll do our best to see if we can verify that or not. But let's go ahead and take a break. So we are here with Martin Willis and Lee Speigel talking about the best stories related to UFOs in 2018, an extraordinary year. I mean, any one of these things we've talked about would be a huge deal. But all in combined, and I know on my list I've got some big whoppers here still. So we'll talk about some of those when we get back from the break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Minds UFO Radio. I am your host, Alejandro Rojas. I am here with Martin Willis of Podcast UFO, Lee Speigel working on his secret UFO documentary with James Fox. And Lee, you were talking about, we were talking about these aviation cases, and you said you had a good one you wanted to share with us.
Well, Martin brought this one up as one of his favorites from 2018 about when he said May 26 over New York. And what I love about this case, it was a pilot. He was flying over Huntington, New York. And coincidentally, I was on the Long Island Expressway today coming to my apartment in Queens, and I drove right past Huntington. So I kind of knew about this sighting. But on May 26th at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a pilot called Kennedy Airport and reported seeing an unidentified object in front of his plane at about 6,000 feet in altitude. And again, like what I love about these sightings, you can go online and hear the conversation between the pilot and someone at Kennedy Air Traffic Control. So the pilot said he didn't know what the object was, and the controller suggested it was a drone, but it didn't show up on radar. When the pilot asked if he could make a left turn and then was given the okay, he then reported that the object moved behind his plane and disappeared into clouds. So then when he told the controller that the object also had lights on it, he was given a special telephone number and instructed to call it after he landed, and someone would be waiting for his call. When the pilot asked the controller, and again, you can hear this conversation online, it's great. When the pilot asked the controller if he would get into trouble for making this phone call, he was assured that would not be the case.
Wow.
I love this case. Oh, my God. Wow. I think the whole aviation thing, it's not so much that the UFOs are buzzing around the airplanes, but pilots are starting to talk about it. And for some reason, we're able to go online and hear these conversations. Like, nobody's trying to hide this.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what Martin was saying. It's just, it really has changed. UFOs are okay now. They're not just complete, silliness. At least less and less people are considering it that.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
And in that article I was reading about that, it said that the FAA was investigating it, and I thought they'd never investigated anything like that.
That's what they say. They don't investigate things like that. However, I mean, we know that there have been times where they have looked into incidents like this, but unfortunately have not been forthcoming with, real information. Chicago O'Hare, for instance, comes to mind. They looked into that.
Oh, yeah.
But they weren't willing to really share much except to debunk it.
So, Alejandro, what's your next one?
Ooh, my next one. So this is related. My next one, of course, is still ATIP related, but kind of related to everything getting more serious. But this is the extraordinary amount of attention the government is now taking looking into UFOs. And a lot of people have been frustrated with To the Stars, and they've said, well, they keep promising us information and we don't get it. To which I just put palm to face, because it's like, are you kidding? I mean, the materials that we just talked about, that's something new they've talked about. This whole link to Skinwalker, that's something new that they have not had a lot of information, but at least Lou Elizondo has not been shy to address these things. But as Lewis said, at least to some of us, and me, I guess, a little bit behind the scenes, but he's also said this more recently, that a big part of what they're trying to do is, like he said, grease the wheels within the government so that the people who should be releasing information are releasing information. This really kind of started in May. I've got a story on this, and it's kind of funny because the writer is from Politico. His name is Brian Bender, and he tweeted just recently that he's become a darling of the UFO community. And it's because he wrote an article the same day that the New York Times did. He came out with an article about the A-tip, but then also he was covering this U.S. House Science, this space, essentially, conference that was going on with a bunch of companies, and they had this roundtable, these interviews that Politico was doing, and they were interviewing members of the House subcommittee on space, and some other people involved with space policy making. And he asked about UFOs. He asked, is it more credible? Is it okay to talk about UFOs now? And immediately, the representative from the House came up and said, yeah, this is really interesting stuff. I even went to the head of the subcommittee to say, hey, shouldn't we look into this? And then one of the other members who was there, he's a ranking member of the House Subcommittee on Space, and the first guy was a Republican, Ami Bera. Second guy is a Democrat, from California, who brought this up and was really enthusiastic. The second guy was a Republican who said, yeah, he thinks it's worthwhile. And then there was another lady there who is part of this committee on science, space, and technology that helps advise the president. And she said, yes, that she felt it was also something worth looking into. Soon after that, we had an article from Nick Pope in The Guardian. Nick Pope, of course, who worked for the UK government, and he kind of broke down how the Defense Intelligence Agency has been briefed, and he linked to an article that proves that. He talked about these subcommittees, actually briefing or debriefing some of the witnesses that Elizondo had worked with. On the House and the Senate side, looking into this. And then soon after that, I did an interview with Chase Kletsky, who's like the head of, UFO investigations for MUFON, and she said she also had the opportunity to do a 5-minute presentation at the Capitol. She wasn't specific about who she talked to, but it was some subcommittee. And so this is extraordinary that we have congressional subcommittees from space to defense, all, having discussions about UFOs behind the scenes.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And among the things that Commander Fravor, told James Fox and I when we went up to his home in New Hampshire to interview him, he said that he's been in touch with several members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he said that they have talked with him on numerous occasions about what he experienced back in 2004. Wow. And he assured us, he said, without giving you more details, that's what he said to us, without giving you more details, the same kind of things that we experienced in 2004 are now going on off the East Coast this time. And he wouldn't tell us any more about it.
Amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I spoke with Chase recently, Chase Kletsky, and she basically said that she's involved with some public figure, and I just was trying to pull it up, that former government agent, that they are actually forming a UFO think tank.
Really?
And and they're taking it totally serious. And I think it's a group of 5 or more, but fairly, we're talking scientists as well. And I think there's some type of connection to MUFON, but I don't know exactly. So I don't really want to, get that wrong.
I'd love to know more about that.
So this is really interesting. What will result is what's really curious. Are they going to maybe share more about what ATIP is up to? And of course, like I referenced, ATIP was a group that Luis Elizondo ran at the Pentagon, and Elizondo says that organization still exists. So they're still doing research, and we have there was one document, and I might as well mention it. We talked about the Nimitz case because I think you brought it up, Martin, when you were talking about Fravor and him talking about his experience. Well, one of the extraordinary news pieces that came from George Knapp is the leaking of an actual document that I've gotten from several different sources, let alone just Knapp, that was written by the military for the military about that encounter. And that's the only piece of really information we have from ATIP. We don't have any of their reports or analysis or anything like that. So hopefully maybe they'll share more of that. Maybe what if they decide to become more public facing with this organization? What would that entail? I did ask Elizondo at some point, and he didn't mind if I shared this. I asked, well, what if they do that? What if they ask you to come back and start to do more serious investigation and give you more funding? Would you do that? He said no. He hesitated a bit. He said no because he wants to make sure that what he's doing going forward is very open and that the public can see everything that they're doing, that it's very transparent. So he feels like what they're doing at To the Stars is much more transparent. But who knows? I guess that could be a possibility. It's interesting to see where this might lead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Well,
your turn again, Mr. Speigel.
Oh, my turn. Here's a cute little one I found. On June 21st, during a Buffalo, New York TV weather report on TV called WKBW in Buffalo, the meteorologist pointed out something that was from one of their time-lapse cameras. And they showed us, she stopped her the regular weather report to say, look at what one of our cameras picked up. And you see in the background a lot of cloud cover. You see the horizon. And from the horizon, and they stopped the camera, or the film, so you could see. She said, see right there in front of that cloud, way off in the distance, there was a bright orb of light that just suddenly appeared in front of some clouds. And all of a sudden, it started moving toward the camera, and as as Commander Fravor said, the Tic Tac did, this thing came at the camera and then very quickly shot out of sight. And they showed this during the weather report. And I went back and I watched it a couple of times, and it was, whatever it was pretty cool to see. Wow. And nobody tried to figure out what it was, or there was no explanation, but there it was during the weather report for all to see. I like that. It was a good one.
That's interesting. I was just contacted the other day by someone that said, boy, if there's a way you can get this clip on CNN, he said, if it wasn't a UFO, I don't know what the heck it was. And, nobody called it out. And he gave quite the detail of what he thought he saw.
What network did you say that was?
That was CNN. He said he was watching CNN news.
Yeah.
The thing that I saw was up in Buffalo, New York. The name of the station is WKBW. I think it may be an affiliate of ABC. But still, I mean, you could tell it was a real live weather report, and they thought it was interesting enough to stop the report to show whatever this thing was that their own camera picked up coming at them. It was great.
We'll have to take a look at that one because, I'll have to take a look. It's just, I know those cameras can be tricky because they, getting into Mark D'Antonio mode like we are.
Yes, that's right.
Uh-oh.
Because the way things look when at night with weather cameras, bugs and things can reflect, and especially if they're closer, they will reflect the IR from the camera if it has an IR or if it has a light. And so, for instance, in a dark area, when one thing is lit, it's going to light up really bright. It's something, of course, we do. Martin and I know when we're doing our podcast, or you when you're shooting your documentary. Yeah. That's one way you get, dramatic looks by having a dark background that is in the distance and then something lit in the foreground. So that can happen a lot. It's just, I've seen a lot of these, and I know I've seen a few of these this year that were effects like that. But it's fun, I think, when the news captures things like that and they get really excited about it.
Yeah, they actually they weren't trying to put it down or ridicule it or make fun of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Martin, let's move to your next one.
Okay, well, I think this was a pretty big story, and it wasn't that long ago. Harvard researchers see alien potential in mysterious object. That's the title. And this is, of course, headlines about a paper that was submitted to the Astrophysical Journal Letters. So the mysterious cigar-shaped object spotted tumbling through our solar system last year may have been an alien spacecraft sent to investigate Earth. That's kind of, in one of the articles, this kind of goes on. But the object nicknamed Oumuamua, which means a messenger that reaches out from the distant past in Hawaiian, was discovered back in October of 2017 by the Pan-STARRS 1 telescope in Hawaii. Since its discovery, though, scientists have been at odds to explain its unusual features and precise origins, with researchers first calling it a comet, then an asteroid, before finally deeming it the first of its kind, a new class of interstellar objects. And the paper by the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics raised the possibility that the elongated dark red object, which is 10 times as long as it is wide and traveling at speeds of 196,000 miles an hour, which I think is incredible, might have an artificial origin. So it was...
Origin.
Avi Loeb and Frank Bailey Jr. Advanced two possibilities for the object's origin: that it is debris from a now-defunct craft tumbling through the galaxy, or that it was launched as a sort of reconnaissance probe from elsewhere in the galaxy. And while he acknowledged that other astronomers, including the researcher who discovered Oumuamua, have dismissed those ideas, Loeb said such debates are an important part of the scientific process. And while alien life may once have been strictly science fiction, he points out to a growing body of evidence suggesting we are not alone. We know a quarter of all the stars in the galaxy have planets in the habitable zone of their host star. So it's to him it was not impossible that there may be life elsewhere. By far the most intriguing observation, Loeb said, suggested that Oumuamua was not just accelerating, but deviating from its expected trajectory. And there is no apparent outgassing like comets have that can cause such a deviation. So anyway, his hope is that if next time around something like that comes through, that people will be more intrigued and will do everything they can to figure out what exactly it is. Anyway, I just thought that was a big story because of the way it was published and who published it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's been extraordinary in the last, recently that we've had. I mean, with Tabby Star, this star that they observe, strange dimming, and I don't think there still is consensus as to why that's happening. But the scientists who wrote up that paper suggested a potential extraterrestrial origins.
Right.
In this case, I think it's highly, highly speculative, but still, it demonstrates how the culture is changing, I think, among astronomers and astrophysicists, in that they are being bold enough to suggest extraterrestrial possibilities. And I think, and in particular extraterrestrial civilizations, that is a huge step too. I think that is so cool, so interesting. I mean, more recently we have this article from what his name was, Colombo. He did this talk at the SETI conference where he suggested that, hey, maybe some of these UFOs do come from elsewhere. Just because physically humans wouldn't be able to travel, what about robots, or what about evolved robots?
Right. Yeah.
And what if they came here and one of these probes crashed on our planet or another planet? These are things that we should investigate because the possibility exists. Incidentally, I guess there's some of you may know the Scientific Coalition for Ufology. Hopefully they won't mind me sharing this, but they had reached out to him and he's really pulled back. He was so kind of devastated by his work being misrepresented, especially in the UK tabloids, that he doesn't even want to talk about any of this anymore, which is really sad. Wow. But still, that more scientists are going there, and hopefully they don't have an experience like him where their work just gets totally blown out of proportion. But yeah, I think that's a big shift in the culture when it comes to these scientists.
There you go. Yep.
All right.
I agree.
Couple more stories because we're running out of time, and the first one, there's two that I want to talk about, but I'm just going to bring up one for now, and then I want to get your feelings on the other. This next big story, my next big story, since we talked pretty much about all the ATIP stuff, is Project Blue Book. To me, History Channel tackling Project Blue Book and deciding to represent it. It's dramatized. It's fiction. You know, Martin and I, we talked about this. In fact, somebody accused us of just being one big, long commercial. It's not a big, long commercial. It's significant because this is going to have an effect on millions of viewers and millions of people. It's already having an effect on their perceptions when it comes to UFOs and the Air Force's investigation of UFOs, which wasn't black and white, cut and dry as all of us know. There was a lot of mystery in those cases, and there was not a consensus that these were all mundane objects. And I think that's going to come out in this program, especially because the lead character, who's very likable, played by Aidan Gillen, is Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who, Lee, you've got to meet, but he comes across as just a very likable person, and I think that he's going to be somewhat of a hero in this show, where people are going to look up and they're going to be tending to gravitate towards his opinions and ideas about this topic and be looking into real cases. And Lee, I don't know if you heard my interview from last week of Paul Hynek, but I did ask him on the air if he remembered you when he was a kid coming into the house, and he did remember you.
The thing that I have heard about this upcoming series is that I think part of the promotion is that they're giving the impression that Dr. Hynek was like the leader of Project Blue Book, that he was the guy that was brought in to lead the investigations, but that's not true. Now you've seen a couple of the episodes. Do they give that impression about him?
Not really.
Not at all.
No.
Yeah. In fact,
I've seen the first 6 episodes.
Yeah. Martin's seen the first 6. I've seen the first couple, and Martin, you can correct me and give me your ideas, but I mean, it's the Air Force that's driving this, and just like in real life, they bring on Dr. Hynek as a consultant, but in fact, they're kind of bullying him. They've got one character that kind of represents most of the Air Force people. But yeah, Martin, your perception?
Yeah, they're controlling him. They want to control him. They don't want him to look too hard into the topic, into the specific, investigations. So they're definitely actually, as far as I got in the 6 episode screeners, there is that, they want him to just debunk and that's it, and don't look too hard.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
I would say that I understand people who are criticizing the details. But I think you just can't do that with fiction, in that you're never going to get all the details to be accurate. Look at Close Encounters and what a positive effect that had. It's probably why I'm so compelled to be in this field. It's not accurate. It's fictionalized what J. Allen Hynek consulted Spielberg about, but it gives you a sense of what was going on. And I think what is good about what the History Channel is doing is they're saying, okay, here's our fiction show that gives you kind of a sense of what was going on. But if you go to our website, we have real articles that are giving you the facts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you both came away from the episodes feeling that way. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Yeah, I really am. So I thank you both for giving me a little preview just from what you've said.
And then finally, I want to ask you guys this real quick. Or did you have something more to say about it?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The other big thing, of course, that's happened at the end of the year that we probably should address is Jeremy Corbell's second documentary of the year on Bob Lazar. Now, I've seen this. I don't know if you all have. I think, Martin, you have. Yeah. And is it a big story? I think in a way it's a story in that what's shocking is even just today there's this major comedian who tweeted Jeremy and said, hey, great job on the documentary. It's so important. So the penetration, I guess this topic is getting into the mainstream from this documentary. I think it's significant. It's interesting. The guy's name was Dane Cook. Got something like over 3 million followers, and he retweeted Jeremy Singh and said, hey, he loved it. And so culturally, I think it's significant. Now, I don't know if there's anything really compelling and convincing. I think it's great. We heard from way more from Lazar than we've ever heard before. But yeah, this is another pretty big thing, I guess, for this field that's happened at the end of the year.
Well, I agree. And whether everything that he has told over the years is true or not, it's still a pretty compelling story because compared to all the other stuff, all the criticism about Lazar and what did he say and was it true, at the very least, if it wasn't for Lazar telling his story to George Knapp back in 1988, 89, we might never have heard of a thing called Area 51.
Right. I mean, it made it famous.
Yeah. And so he at least wasn't lying about that because the government finally said, yeah, okay, there is an Area 51, but there are no aliens there. But even because of that, it was because of the things that Lazar said back then to George, and then George broke the story. Now it's in our consciousness, Area 51. That's what's really important and significant to me.
What do you think, Martin?
Well, I watched the documentary, and I came away from it just thinking that I was trying. There was an attempt to convince me, or convince the watcher, the listener, whatever, of it. And I got to tell you, I'm still on the fence about Bob Lazar. It's still a big mystery to me. I don't really know what to think about it.
I am too. I agree with you. I mean, I felt there were a couple of my questions that I felt were not answered, that were answered in the film. Not convincingly, I would say. I mean, I think, I shouldn't say that. I would say compelling answers, but not necessarily something to knock me off of being on the fence over this. And some people on Twitter, I think just today, were saying, "Oh, you're talking to Alejandro, who's a believer," and I'm not. I'm very much on the fence with Lazar. But it was a compelling documentary, and it was really interesting to see more about him, and it did give me more to think about, that's for sure, about this case. And Lee, I think you really got to see it as soon as you can, because it does change the conversation a bit.
Okay. All right. I trust you. And I like Jeremy. I like the work that he does. He's very passionate about his work, and I believe that Jeremy has a lot of credibility as a filmmaker. So yeah, I'll definitely watch it. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Since I snuck in those two last ones, I'll give you guys a chance. If you have anything, really compelling from the last year that you want to add in here before we end, now is your chance.
Okay. Well, you know what? Let me jump in. There were two videos that I saw, one from June and then one from July. The one in June shows a black cigar-shaped object,
yes,
but hovering horizontally over, of all places, the Nazca lines in Peru.
Right.
And the part of the story is that the Peruvian Association of Ufology, they uploaded the video on June 27th and described the strange unmoving object. And the videographer who took it, he kept zooming in and out so that viewers could get a sense of how far away the UFO sat in the sky above some mountains, and I appreciated that. So that was one cigar-shaped UFO, and then following that, on July 7th, a family reported and they videotaped a black cigar-shaped UFO hovering, this time vertically, over Banbury in the UK. And at approximately 1 minute into the video, there's suddenly a bright light that moves upward from the bottom of the object, goes all the way up to the top.
Yes.
Before the videographer managed to get his camera focused on the object, he later reported that it was flashing and rotating. Two really interesting cigar-shaped videos, I thought.
Yes,
I'm familiar with these ones.
Yeah, I don't have anything more to comment, except I'd like to comment on the last video you're talking about, Lee.
Yeah.
And what I noticed about that particular video, because you did see the light go along the side of it. But when he was just about closing out, just at the very end, it appeared to be, and nobody mentioned this, that there were along the horizontally along both sides, there seemed to be a glowing or a light. I don't know if you want to check that video out again, but
okay.
I thought nobody even talked about that, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well,
nice.
And that was definitely something in the sky for sure. It wasn't anything made up. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting.
Sorry to be the party pooper, but I just feel, in my opinion, the Nazca Line one looks like a cloud to me. It looks like, this happens a lot, where it's probably even part of a contrail because it's long and skinny, but it looks cloudish to me. I really feel it looks like a cloud or probably a piece of contrail. And then the second one, to me, and I don't know, to me, I think they both clearly look like these. It looks like a solar balloon. And in the UK, that's where solar balloons became big. And the lighter effects are from the wind, and because it's made out of a very thin material. And so it's reflecting the sun. I don't think it's self-luminescent at all. I think it's just reflecting the sun in different ways as it moves around the sky, and the wind makes it the very thin skin kind of move around. So,
well, I know I thought about that, but I do want to say that if you get a chance to take a look at that one, just look at the end and take a look at what I was mentioning about the lights on both sides of it.
Yeah.
Well, I know exactly what you mean. It's kind of an aurora, but again, I mean, if it's reflecting, and that's more of an effect of the camera than the actual object itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think you just de-Antonio'd us.
I know. Well, these are both ones that I posted. We've posted in the Open Minds UFO news group, which I implore everybody to check out because we have a lot of great people in there, including DeAntonio, to look at these videos. And people really give them some pretty tough scrutiny, which is great because we want to know. And, of course, sometimes we all agree, sometimes we don't. Well, I shouldn't say that. In fact, everybody disagrees on all of them. But I think, I don't know if it's DeAntonio who chimed in on this. I think he did on that second one especially. But, I kind of agree with those conclusions. And the hard part is, like DeAntonio says, if we can't prove otherwise, if there's nothing in there that can really prove otherwise, then your null hypothesis is essentially what you got to go with. Nice. So, Martin, did you have any last minute?
No, that's it for me. I'm done.
I would like to tell the audience that, and this is a plug for Alejandro. Alejandro always posts really interesting headlines on Open Minds TV. And on November 1st of 2018, you had a headline that really caught my attention. The one about how actor Lawrence Fishburne is going to star and produce this 8-part TV UFO drama called Rendlesham. I like that.
Yeah, that is a really interesting thing that there'll be a TV show coming up about the Rendlesham Forest incident.
I know.
So that ought to be really interesting.
It may not be newsy, but we are talking about 2018, and that's when you had your headline and the story about it. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I agree. Well, thanks for the plug, and that is a good one. Something to look forward to. So, other things to look forward to is Martin Willis and Podcast UFOs. So I'm sure you're going to have another year of great shows. You're not planning on going anywhere, right, Martin?
No, I'm going nowhere.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
That's
maybe. Yeah.
And then, of course, Lee, we've got your documentary to look forward to, hopefully in the spring.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, and neither can I, because I want to move on to the next project, but not before I take a trip somewhere, just to kind of get it out of my system. So.
And then most likely all of us will be meeting, and hopefully with Jeremy, and I'll say this right now, at least I've gotten several verbal confirmations that we'll have George Knapp, Luis Elizondo, of course you two will be there, and then hopefully James Fox should be able to make it. We'll be all getting together here in the Phoenix area in September for the International UFO Congress.
I can't wait to see what that's all going to look like. That'll be amazing.
How friggin' cool.
And you know, we're still working on getting Stan Friedman to make an appearance there.
Well, he says he's going to be there too, so we'll be able to give him a fond farewell, because I guess the one thing we didn't mention of this year, and I actually had it noted, is that Stanton Friedman retired in 2018.
That's right.
Well, that's right. That's right. That was a big news item too. But he's still, but at least he's not taking his suitcase around anymore like he used to now, and he's just kind of showing up to thank people, and I love that. And we all owe him so much in this field. We do. I agree. Absolutely. I mean, he's an extraordinary person. And we're so lucky to work with him. So it would be a lot of fun to tell him goodbye. And it's really cool that he has been at he's been at many of the last few International UFO Congresses, even if he wasn't speaking, although I think always we end up putting him in a panel or something. And one other thing, speaking of Stanton Friedman, as I kind of do my other things to look out for, is that at the International UFO Congress YouTube page, we posted a video. It's a 30-minute video that is actually clips from a panel from 2015 at the International UFO Congress. This was the same Congress that Bob Lazar was at. And Jeremy had released a short kind of clip that he actually integrated to his more recent documentary at this conference for our conference goers. But we had a whistleblower panel. And on that panel was Ruben Uriarte talking about this case from California. We had Mark Pilkington, who's talked about Richard Doty. He wrote a book on that called Mirage Man, and of course I've talked about him a lot. An alleged whistleblower. And then we had other whistleblower representatives such as Stanton Friedman to talk about Jesse Marcel, who of course the whole Roswell thing, and then of course Jeremy Corbell on the stage to talk about Bob Lazar, which gave us of course an opportunity to have Jeremy and Stanton debate Bob Lazar. And so we've got 30 minutes of them debating during this panel that's uploaded to the UFO Congress YouTube page for people to watch. And then there's a link to watch the entire thing on Vimeo in the show notes there. So definitely people will want to check that out.
That's great.
All right.
Otherwise,
year has come.
Thank you guys so much for being on the show.
Thank you once again.
I hope you guys have a great 2019. And I guess the other things I'll say are just at Open Minds. Don't forget, you can find out links to all of this stuff, and you can get links to the latest news at openminds.tv. Also, I better get going because in 15 minutes, I've got to do my live YouTube show that I do every week at 6 p.m. Well, most weeks, if there's not a holiday or something going on, at 6 p.m. And we've got more exciting interviews in store for the show, so be sure to check back. Also, some of you might have noticed our lamps, these UFO hovering lamps, have been a huge hit at the UFO Congress store, along with other things. And we ran out of them, but we're going to be getting more in soon if you were curious about when we're getting those, because I've had a lot of people ask about them. But we've got all kinds of cool stuff at the store that you can check out at store.ufocongress.com. And I guess just stay tuned for more information. Thank you so much to Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music of the show. Thank you to Systematics for the bumper music. And of course, as usual, thank you all the listeners for listening. And until next week, anybody want to join me with my little end? Adios, muchachos.
Chachos.